Order. We'll move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I'll give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. I refer to the Albanese Government's release of hardcore criminals from detention into the community. The Government stated in the High Court that 92 individuals were to be impacted by the decision, yet the Minister has stated that only 80 offenders have been released into the community. On what basis did the Minister release these 80 criminals but continue to hold the remaining 12?
Give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question on this very serious matter. It is the case that on Wednesday of last week, the High Court handed down a decision which required the release of non-citizens who, as the Leader of the Opposition and others have said, including people who have committed very, very serious crimes, from immigration detention. Immigration detention where I had maintained them in. The High Court required their release. We put before the court the details of those potentially affected. The High Court's decision required a consideration of those held in immigration detention against the test the High Court had set out, being people with no real prospect of removal of Australia becoming practicable in the reasonably foreseeable future. On that basis, in accordance with the decision of the court, the relevant officers in the department and the Leader of the Opposition would be familiar with the process of officers with powers under the Migration Act, made those considerations as soon as possible. I can inform the House, I said yesterday 80 such people were required to be released. I have released a further person has been released yesterday, and I have imposed similarly strict visa conditions on that person.
Give the call to the member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. How is the Albanese Labor Government prioritising community safety in implementing the recent High Court decision?
Order. The Minister will resume her. The Minister will resume her seat. There was far too many interjections during that question. We'll hear that question again because I need to hear the question. So no interjections during the question and hopefully none after either. Give the call to the member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. How is the Albanese Labor Government prioritising community safety in implementing the recent High Court decision?
Call to the Minister for Home Affairs and the Minister for Cybersecurity.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. Speaker, as the Minister for Immigration has just outlined to the Parliament, last Wednesday the High Court handed down a decision which overturned a 20-year precedent which has governed how the Commonwealth deals with detaining certain non-citizens. And the implication of this decision, Speaker, is that the Commonwealth must immediately release a set of affected individuals from immigration detention. I just want to be absolutely clear with the Parliament here, Speaker. The Commonwealth argued against the release of these people. Some of these people have committed disgusting crimes. Some of them have hurt people who are still here in our country, and it is those victims that we care about. And I can tell the Parliament that there is one single focus and one single priority that we are using to manage the implications of the High Court's decision, and that is the community safety of the Australian citizens who elect us to this Parliament. Now, Speaker, to ensure that we are able to do this, we have set up a police response across the states and territories. Following the High Court's decision, the AFP Commissioner briefed in person the Police Commissioner of every state and territory around the Commonwealth. On the 10th of November, Operation Aegis, which is a joint AFP-ABF-led operation, was established, which is managing the overall response working with state and territory police. This is ensuring that as people are released from immigration detention, they are able to be incorporated into state and territory post-offender management programs. Speaker, the parliament should know that the purpose of Operation Aegis is to individually case manage every single one of these people as they are released from detention, and I want to thank law enforcement and police around the country who are working with the Commonwealth Government to protect community safety at this time. Speaker, the parliament has heard about the stringent visa conditions that we have put on these people, the strictest possible that are available under Australian law. What this means is that these people are restricted to certain types of employment. They must report in person to authorities, in some instances daily. We will require continuous reporting on a range of different issues. Now, Speaker, there is more to say about this matter, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity during question time. But I do want to just finish by saying that we are not going to get a lecture on managing the integrity of the migration system by the Leader of the Opposition.
Order. The minister will pause. Order. Members on my right, I want to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, there is absolutely no basis for this minister to be going to the record of the previous government. The question was very specific.
Order.
How is the Albanese Labor government prioritising community safety in implementing the High Court's decision?
I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, it's completely irrelevant to the question because of the way these individuals made it into Australia in the first place was through the now Leader of the Opposition.
Order. Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting immediately. The Leader of the Nationals and the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The minister needs to be relevant to the question. It is not an excuse just to go into any attacks on the opposition. I want her to remain relevant to the question. The Leader of the House is correct in terms of the context. I'm giving her some leeway, but this is not a reason just to compare and contrast. That was not in the question. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. We have a number of independent reports now that show us that the Leader of the Opposition broke Australia's migration system. And what I'd like to hear from the Leader of the Opposition, instead of free and fair advice,
the minister will return to the question.
Speaker, what we'd like to hear from the Leader of the Opposition is not advice to the government about something that he couldn't manage, but perhaps a little bit of contrition for the role that he played in all of this.
Members on my left, has the minister concluded her answer? Move to the next question. The member for Wannon is seeking the call.
Yes.
He has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. The Albanese Labor government has released 80 hardcore criminals from detention into the community. This includes a pedophile who raped a 10-year-old.
The member for Wannon will pause. Just pause a moment. Pause. Members on my right. The member for Wills is warned. I'll say this one more time. When questions are being asked, they will be heard in silence. That means no noise. The member for Wannon will begin his question again.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. The Albanese Labor government has released 80 hardcore criminals from detention into the community. This includes a pedophile who raped a 10-year-old boy. What accommodation and other financial support is the government now providing to this convicted pedophile and the other hardcore criminals to live in the community?
I just want to hear from the Leader of the House on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the question is dealing with a decision of the High Court of Australia and is describing it as though it is something other than that.
I couldn't hear the Leader. Order. Just resume your seat. We'll deal with this in an orderly way. I just want to hear from the Leader of the House.
The question is dealing with a decision that is a decision of the High Court of Australia. It is framing it as though it is not a decision of the High Court of Australia, it's a decision of the Albanese government, when the government in fact argued against that outcome at the High Court.
Look, the question is in order. I'm just going to ask the Shadow Minister to rephrase the question to make sure it is within the standing orders. Yeah. Just so we can get on with the... Yeah. On the point
Mr.
of order.
Speaker, on that point, the minister in his previous answer made reference to his decision to release one of these people, an additional 80 to 81 hardcore criminals now to be released. It is a decision of the minister to release people, and the question as it's framed is perfectly in order.
Well, let me just hear the question again to make sure, and just to make sure that it is within the standing orders, and perhaps a reframing would assist the House.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. The Albanese Labor government, following the High Court decision, has released 80 hardcore criminals from detention into the community. This includes a pedophile who raped a 10-year-old boy. What accommodation and other financial support is the government now providing to this convicted pedophile and the other hardcore criminals to live in the community?
I thank the member. The Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. I say again, as my friend the Member for Home Affairs have just said, and I have said repeatedly, on Wednesday the High Court handed down a decision which required the release of non-citizens. Members opposite say they know that, but clearly they do not. Now, we, as the respondent to this, I opposed that application. Let me be very clear about that. And I opposed that application for reasons which I think unite pretty much everyone in this place. That we believe that non-citizens, that non-citizens who have committed very serious criminal offences, including sexual offences like the offences that the Shadow Minister just referred to, should not continue to remain in Australia. Of course, the circumstances here are that we have not been able to remove them. And when I say we, I say again that these are people, none of whom who arrived in Australia since the election of the Albanese government. And members opposite should perhaps bear that in mind. Members opposite should bear that in mind, as well as our shared concern, our shared rejection and revulsion at the behaviour of...
The Minister will pause. And the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, the question read as follows in part. What accommodation and other financial support is the government now providing to this convicted pedophile and the other hardcore criminals to live in the community?
Order. The Minister is halfway through his answer.
I just say...
There are a number of parts. The Leader of the Opposition, I'm trying to deal with his point of order. There are a number of parts to the question. He is being relevant at this stage. I'm just going to ask him to return to the question to make sure he is addressing all parts of the question. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. I just say again, our concern is always to retain community safety. We have fought to resist the decision that ultimately the High Court handed down. Again, I say this for the reasons that I think unite us in this place. In terms of the question directly put at the end of the Shadow Minister's question, I've got to say two things. Firstly, of course, as he would well know, as the Leader of the Opposition would well know, I can't comment on individual cases. I can say that for reasons including the requirements of state and territory orders that a person in the circumstances he described would require, as well as the stringent visa conditions, require us, of course, to be certain about where such a person is located. I think he would understand that, so that we can ensure community safety. I spoke yesterday about the measures we put in place before the decision was handed down to ensure coordination with state and territory law enforcement authorities prior to the decision being handed down in the event that any releases were required. This, of course, requires us to take the steps, including the steps that ordinarily apply to someone who is released from a form of detention, the Status Resolution Support Service, but it is absolutely critical that we enable us to have certainty as to where someone is, particularly a person who is guilty of the sort of offences that you have described, who will be subject to state obligations, perhaps as someone on the Child Sex Offenders Register, which obviously restricts the places in which they can reside. Or a pedophile, yeah, they should be restricted in where they can live.
Order.
That requires us to work towards that.
The call to the honourable member for Corwell.
The question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government making it more affordable for Australians to access essential medicines through the PBS? Has the government encountered any obstacles in making medicines cheaper for Australians?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Caldwell for her question. I know what a passionate advocate she is, particularly for the health and dignity of older Australians in her electorate, which is why I know she was so delighted at our government's decision to give 5 million older Australians access to the latest cutting-edge shingles vaccine completely free of charge. Before the November the 1st, they were paying $560, but now they have access to the most comprehensive shingles vaccine program on the planet. Just one part, Mr Speaker, of our commitment to strengthening Medicare through cheaper medicines. Already this year, Mr Speaker, around 2 million pensioners and concession card holders have benefited from our decision last year to cut the maximum amount they pay for all their medicines by 25%, the first wave of our cheaper medicines policy. That's 2 million pensioners and concession card holders, Mr Speaker, paying up to 25% less for their medicines this year. And general patients are getting cheaper medicines too, through the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS on the 1st of January, the second wave of our cheaper medicines reforms. This year, Mr Speaker, general patients will have saved almost $250 million from that measure alone. And from the 1st of September, 4 million Australians were able to go to their doctor and ask for a 60-day script for around 100 common medicines for ongoing health conditions. The third wave of cheaper medicines, and the Leader of the Nationals asks how that's going. Well, already more than 600,000 60-day prescriptions have been issued for the price of a single script, saving people money, saving people time, freeing up all of those desperately needed GP consults. And that's why so many other countries have been doing this for years. It's why every doctors group, every patient group supported the government's policy. But I'm asked by the member for Caldwell about obstacles, Mr Speaker. Well, 5 years ago, the former government made a deliberate decision to reject the expert advice to introduce 60-day scripts, making patients pay hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars since that time they didn't have to pay. And only a few months ago, the Coalition showed they'd learned nothing, voting time and time again in the other place to block access to cheaper medicines for millions of Australians. Now, this is perhaps not surprising, Mr Speaker, from a party led by a man who, when he was the Health Minister, not only tried to abolish bulk billing altogether and make people pay every time they went to a doctor, not only tried to cut $50 billion from hospitals, but also tried to jack up the price of medicine by up to $5 a script.
Before I call the member for the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I'm trying to do some acknowledgements. Just get the member for Kennedy will get the call. Before I call him, I'm just going to do some acknowledgements, so just resume your seat for a moment. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are representatives of a NATO Public Assembly Joint Committee delegation on the second floor with interpreters here in the Parliament. And I'm also delighted to welcome a friend of the Parliament, Her Excellency Vicky Trudell, the United Kingdom High Commissioner to Australia, and as guest as the member for Menzies, Lord Malcolm Orford Forgavel, the United Kingdom's Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Scotland and Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Exports. On behalf of the House, a very warm welcome to you all. Now I give the call to the member for Kennedy.
To the Attorney General. Minister, has no one explained to the High Court the separation of powers? Calling yourself a refugee, rightly or wrongly, doesn't override national sovereignty, which by definition entails the right to accept or deny entry into our homeland. Minister, doesn't responsibility demand deportation of people supporting, advocating and manifesting racial, religious hatred, violence and murder?
Call to the Attorney General. Order. The member for Bruce will cease interjecting, and the member for Kennedy has asked his question. The Attorney General has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. In relation to the High Court's recent decision in the NZYQ matter, my colleagues, the Minister for Home Affairs and the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs have been leading the government's response. As they have made clear in a number of public statements and in answers to questions in this place, the government has acted swiftly to ensure the safety of the Australian community. The member's question does go specifically to the separation of powers. I'm minded to say that as a former minister in the Bjelke-Petersen government, he might recall an exposition on that subject by the leader of that government. But in the NZYQ matter, the Solicitor-General argued on behalf of the Commonwealth Government, on behalf of our government, that the detention settings in place were constitutionally valid. That was the Commonwealth's position. The High Court of Australia disagreed, and the effect of the High Court's decision is that a number of individuals have to be released from immigration detention. When the High Court finds that individuals are being unlawfully detained, the government cannot ignore it, because the government, I know that those opposite find this difficult to understand, but the government must act in accordance with the law. All governments must act in accordance with the law.
Members on my left, the member for Hume will cease interjecting. The Attorney-General will be heard in silence. The question was heard in silence, so will the responsible minister.
I do know that those opposite are struggling with these concepts, but the government must act in accordance with the law. All governments must act in accordance with the law. And as the government has made clear, abundantly clear in a number of public statements, we have acted swiftly to ensure the safety of the Australian community following the High Court's decision. The Albanese government is committed to the safety and well-being of all Australians, and the member has asked me specifically about racial religious hatred.
The Attorney-General will pause. I want to hear from the member for Kennedy on a point of order.
Whether the High Court is legislating. That's the question. Do you run the place, or does the High Court run the place?
Resume your seat. Order. Order. The point of order was about relevance, I hope. I'm just going to make sure that the Attorney-General, when I was listening to him, was talking about the question specifically. Just make sure his answer relates to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member has asked me specifically about racial and religious hatred. There is no place in Australia for hate speech of any kind. On the 18th of October, the government announced $50 million for 177 grants under the Securing Faith-Based Places grant program. These grants will improve security at religious schools and preschools, places of worship and faith-based community centres in every state and territory across different faith communities. The government's also announced $25 million to the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, ECAJ, and $25 million to the Australian, Palestinian, Muslim and other communities affected by the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the government's responsible budget management helping take the pressure off households and enabling the government to invest in cost-of-living relief?
The member for Barker will cease interjecting. The call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Corangamite for her question about cost-of-living pressures facing Australian families, because that is, of course, the number one issue that the government is focused on. And there are three vital ways we're tackling cost of living.
Members on my left. The member for Gippsland.
Well, we get no questions on cost of living from those opposite, Mr Speaker. None.
Order.
We're focused on getting costs down for families, getting wages up for workers, and getting the budget onto a stronger foundation. We're managing the budget responsibly, and the question goes to that. We inherited a $78 billion deficit, and we turned that into a $22 billion surplus, a $100 billion turnaround, the first surplus in 15 years, after the former government promised a surplus in their first year and every year thereafter when they were elected in 2013. Now, the result of that, of course, is that the Fitch Ratings Agency said this. They last week reaffirmed our AAA rating. They said this: the government has saved the bulk of the recent revenue windfalls, indicating a desire to maintain a fiscal stance supportive of reducing inflation and pursue prudent fiscal policies. That's what we have. That's what we have done. We have 3 policies to drive down inflation, one of which is the responsible fiscal policy. The second is dealing with supply chain issues, including fixing some of our trade relationships that were broken while the former government was in office. Well, you had good trade agreements, you just didn't have any trade. That was the problem. That was the problem.
The Leader of the Nationals will cease
who
ejecting.
couldn't get a return phone call from their counterparts.
Order.
That's what you had. That's what you had over there.
Order.
Really good agreements. Really good agreements, Mr. Speaker. And
Order.
the third element, of course, is our targeted cost of living relief. $23 billion, cheaper medicines, affordable housing, energy bill relief, higher wages, cheaper childcare. What do all those have in common?
Member for
They are
Fisher.
all opposed by those opposite. A leader of the opposition who has nothing positive to offer the nation. Nothing positive. And of course he was out there saying after the last budget, already you have a ratings agency because out there talking about our AAA rating being negatively impacted. Well, none of that has happened. None of that has happened. Says the sky will fall in. We'll continue to manage the
Prime
budget
Minister's
responsibly.
time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. Are any of the 81 hardcore criminals receiving taxpayer-funded accommodation now they have been released into the community?
Call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizen. Order. Members on my left and right. I want to hear from the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker. I might make the point that we fought in the court to retain them in taxpayer-funded accommodation in the immigration detention facilities. I hope the Shadow Minister isn't suggesting otherwise. Of course, as I said only a minute ago, our concern is to maintain community safety. A critical element of that, in some cases, is having some control over where an individual lives. That will involve the expenditure, of course, of Commonwealth funds, which is important to keep communities safe.
Call to the honourable member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to ensure defence is appropriately resourced, and why is this required after a wasted decade?
Give the call. The member for Barker is warned and is not to interject any more during question time, particularly during questions. I can't be clearer than that. I'm a bit more generous. Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Can I thank the member for her question? Today, Australia is spending 2% of its GDP on defence. Now, splashing dollars around is easy, but translating that spend into a potent and a lethal capability for our nation is actually hard. It requires strategic planning backed up by difficult decisions, which is why the government undertook the Defence Strategic Review and has followed through with real action, like restructuring the Army or funding the guided weapons enterprise such that we will see the beginning of the manufacture of missiles in Australia in 2 years. These are serious decisions backed up by real money. But the task of the government has been made all the more difficult by virtue of the mess that we inherited from those opposite, from the Leader of the Opposition. In coming to government, a full quarter of what defence was expected to purchase, there was no money for. And that's because we saw announcements like a $35 billion guided weapons enterprise, but only $1 billion committed to it, or an announcement of an increase in the cyber capacity of the Australian Signals Directorate through Red Spice with an $8 billion hole in it. Announcement after announcement without anything like the real allocation of money for it. It was as if they were trying to do defence by press release. And what that meant was that the defence budget didn't add up and the defence establishment was left wondering what program would actually really make it to reality. And that is the legacy of the Leader of the Opposition when it comes to defence. But it wasn't just defence. In Home Affairs, we see that the Minister took his eyes off the ball, as has been revealed by the Nixon Review. As the Health Minister, he sought to abolish bulk billing. His record speaks for himself. He was a ministerial wrecking ball, and now, as the Leader of the Opposition, he has not one single positive plan for the future. And for all their bluster over there, last week, when Andrew Bolt asked the Shadow Minister the very simple question as to whether or not the Liberals would increase funding on defence, the Shadow Minister's answer, if not anything else, was candid and it was clear. He said, and I quote, "I can't commit to increased spending." Well, the Shadow Minister might be able to commit to it, but we can, because we are increasing defence spending not just in accordance with the trajectory that we inherited from those opposite, but by much more, taking defence spending to 2.3% of GDP over the next 10 years.
The Deputy Prime Minister's time has concluded. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. The Albanese Labor government has, following a High Court decision, released 80 hardcore criminals into the community. This includes a pedophile who raped a 10-year-old boy, a hitman who murdered a pregnant woman and blew up her body with military-grade explosives, and a violent sex predator who attacks elderly women in their home. Will the Minister confirm how many of these 80 individuals are convicted pedophiles, murderers or rapists?
The call. Call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you very much. And I thank the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party for her question. I say again that the decision of the High Court, which required release, affects some very, very serious offenders, including people who have committed the offences you've described. Sex offenders, a murderer, at least one murderer. I believe there are 3 murderers. There are several sex offenders. I will provide her with the precise details of those who fall into those 3 categories of offending. I do note that the Shadow Minister here and the Shadow Minister for Home Affairs have reached out for a briefing, which I understand is in the process of being arranged as well. But I say again that the Commonwealth resisted the application brought by the individual, the subject of these proceedings. We resisted those applications for exactly the reasons that I think animate the concerns of the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party and the concerns of every member in this place. Our focus throughout, in anticipation of the decision and since it is on ensuring the safety of the Australian community, that includes looking at all options we have to ensure safety.
Give a call to the Honourable Member for Higgins.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government closing the loophole that allows gig workers to be underpaid and have no minimum standards? What has been the response to the government's plans?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Higgins for the question. We've had a system of minimum wages and awards in this country for more than 100 years. But for the last decade, there's been a growing section of the economy where none of that applies. We have minimum standards and an award system because we decided in the 20th century that we would not have 19th century working conditions. We decided in the 20th century that we would not be a country where wages were simply a race to the bottom. We made a decision as a country that we would not be a nation where you had to rely on tips in order to make ends meet. But in the last decade, there has been a growing section of people doing the exact sort of work that minimum standards were always there to help who get no minimum standards at all. You have minimum standards for the people who pick the fresh produce, who transport it to the warehouse, who transport it to the restaurant, who make it in the kitchen at the restaurant, but the person who brings that food and home delivers it to your home has no minimum standards at all. And they have no minimum standards because at the moment they are classified as somehow being small businesses. Now, I know what it is to be a small business. I grew up in a small business family. I've run a small business myself. Someone delivering a pizza on the back of a bicycle for less than the minimum wage is not running a small business. They are the exact sort of person that minimum standards were always established for. And so what we need to do is accept that those individuals do not want to be transferred into employees.
The member
that
for
people who
Petrie
use the
is
platforms
warned.
want the flexibility of the platform. Customers want the flexibility of the platform. So we have to, in accepting that, have a system which allows there to be some minimum standards. And if those opposite, who've already decided to say no to minimum standards to the people who bring the food all the way to your front door, that they should somehow have no minimum standards, listen to what Ustav Butros said when he addressed the Senate inquiry last week. It's paying me $20, even less than that an hour, without super, without any personal leave, without any sick leave, nothing. I want you all to please look into this very deeply and look at our problems and pass this legislation which will help protect our basic standard payments. We just want our basic minimum wage. And faced with that, the Leader of the Opposition and the team opposite says no.
Order. The House comes to order here from the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. When did the minister seek advice about a legislative fix to the High Court decision?
The call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and thank you, Shadow Minister, for your question. Immediately after the decision, we sought advice on its implications in the days...
Order.
Sorry. Yeah.
Order. The Minister will pause. The question has been asked in silence. I want to hear the answer in silence as well.
Yeah.
Give the call to the
Minister.
Minister.
Advice on its implications. That advice contemplated the work that was done in advance of the decision in contemplation of it. Now, I've talked, I think, on at least 3 occasions, as has the Minister for Home Affairs, about some of the practical steps we sought to have in place in the event of an adverse judgment. We also sought advice prior to the hearing on the options that would be available depending on the various outcomes of the decision. I remind the Shadow Minister and indeed all members that we are yet to receive the reasons for the High Court's decision. However, as I said yesterday morning, as my statement together with the Minister for Home Affairs said earlier today, we have always been looking at all regulatory and legislative options which are available.
The Minister will pause on this. Better be on relevance or another point of order.
So, Mr Speaker, the question was
No, relevance. This is just to say I'm rising on a point of order. It's on... Has the Minister concluded his answer? He's concluded his answer. Just remind the member for Wannon, you get the call, just always state what the point of order is. Don't just start saying what you feel. Give the call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. How is the Albanese Labor government ensuring the Commonwealth's investment in infrastructure will deliver projects that genuinely deliver for our communities and end the rorts and waste of the Liberals and the Nationals?
Order. I haven't called the Minister, but the member for Mitchell is seeking a point of order before the minister begins her answer.
Mr. Speaker, the question is out of order. It asks about the Liberal Party and the National Party, which is not the responsibility of the Commonwealth Minister.
I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
The question asks about ending their rorts, and that is our responsibility, to end the rorts of the Liberal and National parties.
The minister hasn't begun her answer. Yeah. I'll make sure the question is within the standing orders, but I'll make sure she's being relevant. And if she strays too far, she won't get too far. I'll give her the call, and she'll be heard in silence.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I particularly thank the member for Lyons for the question and commend him for his ongoing advocacy for infrastructure, particularly his continuous advocacy for the Bridgewater Bridge, which is now finally under construction. Unfortunately, what we have seen in the last 10 years is that the Liberal National Party, using the infrastructure investment pipeline to invest in media statements, in signs, rather than in actually delivering projects that improve our communities. The infrastructure review, which I will be responding to in coming days, found an estimated $33 billion of known cost blowouts in projects in the infrastructure investment program. And they have said that there is a high chance that this will blow out even further. Of projects not yet in construction,
the minister will pause. There is far too much noise coming from the front bench here. The member for Riverina, the member for Gippsland, the Leader of the Nationals, and the member for Page. There's a pattern. I'm just going to say, I want to hear what the minister has to say, and I can't hear what she's saying. The member for Page will leave the chamber under 94A. When I mention you by name, and I'm trying to bring the House to order, that is not the time to interject. Trust me. Just going to take the temperature down so I can hear what the minister has to say. The minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Of the projects not yet in construction, where not a single sod has been turned, the review found that there is $14.2 billion of known cost blowouts. They found that it would simply not be possible to deliver the current 10-year pipeline of projects within the $120 billion Commonwealth allocation.
The member for Barker
Significantly,
leave the
they
chamber
found,
under 94A.
without making significant immediate changes to program settings, the Australian government cannot afford to meet cost pressures, nor, I add any new projects to the pipeline for the next 10 years. That is the legacy left by those opposite. Under them, no new Commonwealth investment in infrastructure projects until 2033. That is the legacy and the mismanagement of those opposite. That is because, in the words of the reviewers, there are projects in the IIP that do not demonstrate merit, lack any national strategic rationale and do not meet the Australian government's national investment priorities. That is why today I have announced our new infrastructure policy statement that will guide Commonwealth infrastructure investment into the future. It recommits the Commonwealth to delivering nationally significant infrastructure, ensuring that we've got productivity, sustainability, livability and investment in infrastructure that is nationally significant. Projects including an involvement of Commonwealth contribution of at least $250 million, freight investment in our key freight routes and projects that align with our broader national priorities in increasing housing and unlocking critical minerals. We will be investing in projects that enhance that productivity. Those opposite have left a complete and utter mess when it comes to the infrastructure investment pipeline, and it's no wonder, frankly, that it was the members of the National Party who were protesting so much. We're getting on with cleaning up your mess and delivering the infrastructure the nation needs.
Has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, today I met with the Youth Climate Delegation in Parliament who are calling on the government to adopt a Duty of Care Act, such as that proposed by Senator David Pocock through the Climate Change Amendment Duty of Care and Intergenerational Equity Bill 2023. Prime Minister, do you accept there is a need for such a bill to ensure governments have a legislated duty to consider the impacts of any decisions they make that could harm the climate, health and well-being of future generations?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for North Sydney for her question and for her genuine care about the issue of climate change and her understanding that it not only represents a challenge, it represents an opportunity. Of course, governments do legislation. That's why I'm a member of a political party that seeks to form government. And what we have done as a government is to legislate for our 43% reduction by 2030 and for net zero by 2050, something which we had a mandate to do. Something that we have done also is to legislate for our safeguard mechanism in order to drive that change through the economy. We do that not just because of what needs to be done today, but because we understand that there is an intergenerational equity issue behind the issue of climate change. Just as there's an issue across developing countries feel as though they haven't been the ones that have created through the Industrial Revolution and since in the First World, in the North if you like, it is the South that have to pay for, in many cases, the costs of rising sea levels in places like Tuvalu, which is why we entered into the agreement that we did after we were approached by Prime Minister Netanyahu from Tuvalu to enter into the first ever comprehensive agreement to provide security for people who are worried about the very existence of their island nations. And that was a growing theme at the climate conference. I understand as well that young people in particular understand that they want not just themselves but their kids and grandkids to be able to see the Great Barrier Reef, to be able to see Kakadu.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for North Sydney on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The point of order is relevance. I really appreciate the Prime Minister taking us through the legislative changes that they've made to date. But the question is, do you accept that there is a need for a bill to hold governments to a duty of care for the decisions they make and the impact those decisions have on future generations?
Just get the Prime Minister to conclude his answer.
I tend not to focus on senators' private members' bills, Mr Speaker, because what we're focused on is government legislation to drive that change through the economy. I certainly understand, as I've been saying very clearly, that in everything that this government does in relation to climate change, we're focused not just on today, we're focused on tomorrow. We're focused on what sort of economy we have. We're focused on the opportunity that young people, I want my grandkids, I hope they don't come along for a long period of time. I must make that point in case Nathan is listening. But I do want them to be able to see the Great Barrier Reef and Kakadu National Park and all the wonderful pristine things which are there. And I also want to ensure that there are good jobs, and good jobs will come with a clean energy economy.
Before I call the member for Macarthur, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Mayor Trent Sullivan, the Mayor of the City of Greater Geelong, Clive Pugh, the Chair of the Committee for Geelong, and Michael Johnson, the CEO of the Committee of Geelong. And also in the gallery is a guest of the member for Kennedy, Mayor Rod Marty of the Tablelands Regional Council, and representatives from the Local Government Association of Queensland. Give the call to the honourable member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government working to deliver more homes for more Australians as part of its plans to help with cost of living pressures?
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Macarthur for this important question, because he knows, like all of us on this side of the House and some of the others on the crossbench here, that too many Australians are having a tough time, particularly those, of course, who are renting or have a mortgage. And that's why we're working hard to make sure we do deliver more homes for Australians that need them most right across the country. Indeed, we're elected with an ambitious housing agenda, and the past few weeks have seen some more significant progress and steps forward. This month, we delivered a historic investment through Housing Australia, which is more than $500 million in federal government support for 1,370 new rental homes across Melbourne. That's 1,370 new homes through Housing Australia, Mr Speaker. This groundbreaking commitment came just one day after the start of the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund. Of course, our fund is the single biggest investment in social and affordable housing in more than a decade, and importantly, of course, it's there in perpetuity with funding each and every year ongoing for more social and affordable rental homes right across the country in our cities and in our regions. And of course, it is 30,000 rental homes in the first 5 years of that fund, Mr Speaker. We've also been supporting regional Australians who've been benefiting from our regional first home buyer guarantee, which turned 1 last month. More than 10,000 people in regional Australia have taken advantage of the support since we introduced it early. And they're amongst the more than 73,000 Australians right across Australia that we've helped into their first home under the Albanese Labor government. In fact, Mr Speaker, 1 in 3 of all first home buyers took advantage of the government's home guarantee scheme in the past financial year. Now, we are working hard, Mr Speaker, but there is more to do. Of course, we do have housing challenges, but these started pre-pandemic. We have fewer homes per 1,000 people than the OECD average, and we know it will take time to turn this around. But we're committed to doing that. We do have, as I said, a broad, ambitious policy, and it has been assessed by an independent analysis that says our policy will save renters billions through the National Cabinet decision with a new target to build 1.2 million well-located homes over 5 years from 1 July 2024. We, of course, have immediate action with our $2 billion social housing accelerator. We've already had very significant announcements about the number of homes with the Prime Minister and the Premier of New South Wales that this will build in New South Wales. We've also had announcements about 600 new homes that were built in Queensland because of that social housing accelerator. And this comes on top of our booster Commonwealth rent assistance, our changes to build to rent, and of course billions and more financing for more social and affordable homes right around the country. We're working hard, but there's more to do.
The Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Wannon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Can the Minister confirm the Albanese Labor government is now paying welfare payments to the 81 hardcore criminals?
The call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
I can confirm that any individual released from immigration detention is being released under the policies that are long-standing under both sides of politics that ensure both the supports that are available under SRSS, but also for all of the reasons around community safety that I've already articulated.
Call to the honourable member for Lingiari.
My question is to the Minister for Government Services. In light of yesterday's release of the government's response into the Royal Commission into Robodebt, what is the Albanese government already doing to ensure a cruel, illegal scheme like Robodebt can never happen again? How does this differ from other approaches?
Good question. Call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for her question. The Royal Commission's verdict into the Coalition Robodebt scandal, it's in. Words used such as crude and cruel, illegal and unfair, guilty until proven innocent. Now, the Royal Commission made 56 recommendations about the Coalition Robodebt scandal. 49 we've agreed on fully, 7 we've agreed in principle. But 2 words summarise Labor's approach to the Robodebt Coalition scandal. Never again. Never again should this be allowed to happen. Yesterday I said how the Albanese government's putting an extra 3,000 frontline support staff to help tackle waiting issues at Centrelink and Service Australia. Today I can update you that we're also learning another lesson from Robodebt, that we've established an advisory board to Services Australia for the MyGov and Services Australia rollout. This advisory board will be the place where ideas are tested before they head out into the world. Ethicists, human rights experts, advocates, digital thinkers, but chaired by a very constructive, positive Liberal. I'll say that again, a constructive, positive Liberal, Victor Dominello. So I thank Victor for stepping up to deliver better government services with this government. But the advisory board shows that Labor understands. We get the lessons of Robodebt. One catastrophic failure of Robodebt is that the previous coalition government couldn't be bothered to listen to anyone outside the bubble of self-serving, managing upwards senior public servants, of highly paid PwC consultants, or indeed just by putting in disinterested, forgetful, negligent ministers. The coalition never liked to hear from those who they couldn't control or bully. But I've been asked about alternative approaches. I regret to say that the member for Dixon shows no insight or learning the lessons of Robodebt. Yesterday afternoon, after question time, he channelled his best sense of Stuart Robert outrage. Actually, I'll take that back, that's too harsh. But more the member for Cook outrage that he was the victim. The member for Dixon says he was the victim of the political attacks on Robodebt. But he went further, he said, I'd overlooked a press conference on the 8th of July where he said, when the problems were brought to the attention of the government at the time, the program was stopped. He said on July the 8th that when the coalition learned there were problems, they stopped it. But today's editorial of The Australian, no less, says that the coalition government was informed at the end of 2016 of the problems. They were saturated in coverage. But this forgetful, evasive leader of the opposition with nothing positive to say, he won't even say he wants credit for closing it when in fact he was there every time they expanded the scheme.
Give the call to the member for Clark.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Attorney-General. Attorney, given the catastrophic failings with DNA testing in Queensland and other alarming forensic failures like Keogh in South Australia, Eastman in the ACT and Neil Fraser in Tasmania, will you take the lead and work with the states and territories to improve and harmonise Australia's forensic services to restore trust in our criminal justice system? This would include reviewing the National Institute of Forensic Science and the National Association of Testing Authorities.
Call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Clark for his question. It does concern an important matter. I'm sure the member is aware that on the 6th of June 2022, the Premier of Queensland announced a commission of inquiry into forensic DNA testing in Queensland. That review was conducted by the former President of the Queensland Court of Appeal, Walter Sofronoff KC, and Mr Sofronoff delivered his final report on the 13th of December 2022. His report made 123 recommendations for systemic reform of forensic testing of DNA in Queensland, and all of those recommendations have been accepted by the Queensland Government. The Commonwealth has noted the Commission's recommendations on forensic DNA testing in Queensland, including the Commission's view that assessment against the existing international standard for testing and calibration laboratories is not a sufficient benchmark to use as an external review mechanism for forensic laboratories. And going directly to the focus of the member's question, I can say that forensic agencies across Australia are engaging on the important issues that were raised by that Queensland Commission. The Australian-New Zealand Forensic Executive Committee, which is a forensic science leadership group comprising the heads of government and police forensic providers, are seeking national consistency in responding to the Commission's report. This work is intended to address all of that Queensland Commission's recommendations at a national level and facilitate national consistency in forensic services. And I again thank the member for his question and his continued interest in these important matters.
The Attorney-General has concluded his answer. Give the call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. How is the Albanese Labor government working for Australia to help families meet cost of living pressure and access broadband services? Thank you.
Give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And I know he appreciates that in 2023 it's essential for school students in his community to have access to reliable broadband services in order to fully participate in learning and to connect with their teachers and peers. That's why I'm pleased to inform the House that the Albanese government is extending the School Student Broadband Initiative for another 2 years. Yeah. The initiative is providing up to 30,000 eligible families with school-aged children free broadband over the NBN across fibre, fixed wireless and the NBN satellite footprint, the first of its kind to be rolled out nationally. The initiative is already helping to change the lives of more than 5,000 families who are now connected to free internet, and more than 40% of these families live in rural and regional Australia. Now, with funding certainty and the extension to the end of 2025, it's a game changer for children who are being left behind in their learning and has flow-on benefits for the whole family, with the ability to access essential services like telehealth from home for the first time. Feedback from participants has shown what a difference it can make. One parent said, "We haven't been able to afford home internet for some time now due to the cost of living and being unable to work due to my children requiring regular medical appointments." Mr Speaker, I've asked NBN Co to make the program as widely available as possible to support the take-up in rural and remote communities and for First Nations students and their families. Now, we understand that some families have complex needs and unique circumstances that can make getting a connection organised more difficult. And that's why we established the National Referral Centre, to make it easier for families to access the initiative. Any family can contact the Referral Centre on 1800 954 610 to check their eligibility and help get their connections set up. I've also tasked the NBN Low Income and Digital Inclusion Forum to examine discounted products that could assist participating families at the conclusion of the free connection period. This is not only the single way that we're responding to cost of living pressures with the NBN. The recently approved special access undertaking is also supporting the provision of a new basic voice and data service at around half the price of NBN Co's existing entry-level broadband offer. The School Student Broadband Initiative is making a real difference to families today, and we continue to focus on helping unconnected Australians to get online. We are now reviewing the Universal Service Framework to consider what safety net services a modern USO should have in order to improve digital access and inclusion for all.
Give the call to the honourable member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. What has the Albanese government funded and actually built in the last 18 months?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Order. The Leader of the Nationals haven't even called the Minister yet. Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
There are currently over 300 projects that are under construction that are all funded by the Albanese Labor government.
Order. Give the call. Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government helping to ease pressure on families by working to deliver cleaner, cheaper energy? What approaches has the government rejected?
Order. Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question and her very strong and clear climate leadership in her electorate and here in Canberra. Mr Speaker, the Albanese government's approach really has two parts. Firstly, we are providing direct relief to Australian families and to Australian businesses. Around 5 million households and around 1 million businesses are receiving direct support from the Albanese government as part of our energy relief package we passed through the parliament last year against the wishes of those opposite, who voted against it at every opportunity, who voted against it at each and every stage in this House and the other House. And of course, the other thing we're doing is proceeding to prudently manage the rollout of cheap, reliable, renewable energy, Mr Speaker. And the fact that wholesale prices are now under half what they were this time last year is in no small part due to the fact that renewable energy is fulfilling an increasing role in our energy mix. Because we know that renewable energy is cheap energy, even though those opposite simply don't understand it. Now, the honourable member asked me what approaches we've rejected. And what we've rejected is a gamble by the opposition, not a plan, just a gamble on an unproven technology of small modular nuclear reactors, which the opposition is obsessed with. The member for Fairfax, we know the member for Fairfax is a big fan of small modular nuclear reactors. Mr. Speaker. He does his little videos. Time to talk nuclear. They're the world's worst TED Talks, Mr. Speaker, those videos, but they come out regularly.
Minister will just pause and take a breath. The member for Fairfax will not interject, so I can hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, on relevance, Mr Speaker, the principles are very clear. Ministers to be asked questions and to answer about matters within their portfolio responsibility, not the policies of other parties.
I'll deal with this. The question did say what approaches has the government rejected. The minister's been going through policy detail. That is part of the question. I'm going to listen to him carefully for the 1 minute 25 remaining to make sure that he is being relevant, but that is not the main part of the question, but he is entitled to answer that part of the question.
Mr Speaker, and the member for Fairfax has a particular poster child as he proselytises about how good small nuclear reactors are. It's a nuclear reactor called NuScale in Idaho, Mr Speaker. It doesn't actually exist, but the member for Fairfax has been talking about how great it was. He wrote in 9 newspapers, he said evidence of the burgeoning nuclear industry for next-generation technology can also be seen in the SMRs developed by new players. NuScale's integrated reactors offer exceptional flexibility. Now, Mr Speaker, he's also referred to it in his videos. There's been pictures of the NuScale reactor. It's his poster child. It was cancelled last week, Mr Speaker, after a 53% cost blowout. I mean, the member for Fairfax has outrageously criticised the CSIRO. But in fact, the CSIRO is probably conservative. Mr Speaker, he said last week about nuclear. He said it's sort of like Lego. You take it to a site and it's assembled. He says a nuclear reactor is like Lego, Mr Speaker. That's the degree of policy substance we have. He said on 6PR, it's sort of like Lego. You take it to a site, at its site it's assembled. I've got to say, this is the most detailed policy we've had from the opposition in the last 18 months. The only other thing we've had is the member for New England saying if you can see a nuclear reactor from your house, your energy is free.
Order. I give a call to the honourable member for Wannon.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. With 175,000 Australians on a housing waiting list, can the minister confirm how many hardcore criminals have jumped the queue and are being provided taxpayer-funded housing or hotel accommodation?
Order. Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs has the call.
Well, Speaker, it's clear that for members opposite, they will play politics with absolutely everything. With absolutely everything. This is a time where members of this place should come together to respond to the decision. To do our jobs as lawmakers.
The member for Bowman.
To do our jobs as lawmakers. I'll just say a few things very quickly about that. We took steps in anticipation of this decision, thinking about all the possible consequences, thinking about all of them, the arrangements that we would make to keep the community safe, which includes taking measures to house people appropriately, particularly the offenders the Shadow Minister was talking about earlier. He knows better, or he should do.
Order. Hear hear from the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government's cheaper childcare policy delivering cost of living relief for families?
Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Boothby for her question and for her continued advocacy on behalf of the children in her electorate. Mr Speaker, we know that one of the biggest cost of living pressures on families is the cost of early learning, and that's why our government delivered on our commitment to make early learning more affordable. We've lifted the maximum childcare subsidy rate to 90% for families earning less than $80,000 and increased rates for families earning under $530,000. And that meant that we cut the cost of early learning for 1.2 million families right across Australia, including 265,000 families in regional Australia, from the 1st of July this year when those changes came into effect. Now, this is real and responsible cost of living relief. And, Mr Speaker, we know those changes are working. We know those changes are working. The latest CPI report from the ABS shows that early learning affordability has improved on average more than 13.2% because we delivered on our commitment. All major cities across Australia have seen costs for families drop by at least 10%, with some seeing a reduction of more than 17%. The ABS also estimates this. It also estimates that without our changes, the costs for families would have increased by 6.7%. They would have increased. Now, in Adelaide, families have seen an average price drop of 18% in the cost of early childhood education and care. That means 7,300 families are benefiting from more affordable early learning in the members' electorate of Boothby, thanks to the changes of the Albanese Labor government. Now, let's just contrast that to the track record of those opposite, just for a minute here, because in the last four years of government when they were in office, we saw prices for early childhood education increase by double the OECD average. So, Mr Speaker, the Albanese Labor government has made affordable, accessible and quality early learning a priority of this government. This is our goal, and we will continue to work towards that goal, and we will continue to deliver for Australian families, because we know that investment in the early years pays a triple dividend. It's good for families, it's good for children, and it's good for the economy.
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.